Up to $26,000 per employee? They call it the 15-minute refund, but it's not a gimmick. It's for business owners who stuck it out during the pandemic. The Employee Retention Tax Credit, or ERTC. But time is running out to get started. Talk to the experts. JWC Advisors at iHeartTaxRefunds.com. Who are they? CPAs who will keep you on the right side of the IRS. So do it the right way. Go to iHeartTaxRefunds.com. That's iHeartTaxRefunds.com.
Hello world, you're listening to Strategicon, your window to all things security and foreign affairs. Yemen. It is a benighted country just southwest of Saudi Arabia. In 2004, a Shiite uprising led by Hussein Badruddin al-Houthi took hold of parts of Yemen. It was not long before the Saudi monarchy saw this uprising as directly connected to its existential foe in the Middle East, Iran. Of course, nothing in Yemen is what it seems, and no conflict, of which there are plenty of, in this impoverished, fragile state, can be easily explained to outsiders. Nonetheless, the more the Saudi monarchy pointed its accusatory finger at Iran for stirring up unrest in Yemen, the more its accusations became something of self-fulfilling prophecy. Iran did eventually declare its hand on the side of the Houthis, providing local Houthi fighters with intelligence, training, and weaponry. The Saudis, fearing that Houthi contagion might spread to its own significant Shiite population along its vitally important eastern seaboard, home to much of the kingdom's mature oil fields, decided to enter the fray in 2015 and snuff out this rebellion. The Saudis were backed in their land and air campaign by elements of the Yemeni government, an assortment of local thugs and Sunni extremists, the United States, the UAE, Egypt, Morocco, Jordan, and Sudan. Even the American private military contractors backed the Saudis. Israel, with some quiet satisfaction, sat on the sidelines content to let the Arabs bleed themselves out in Yemen, as well as see Iranians get drawn deeper into this morass in the hope of fatally weakening the Ayatollahs in Tehran. The international community has, on the whole, been quiet on the war in Yemen. Maybe because the war is too complicated and multi-layered? Maybe because Yemen simply doesn't matter to the international community. We will also be looking at the latest round of US-imposed oil sanctions on Iran. As part of the series of never-ending confrontations and proxy wars in and around the Gulf region, will this be America's last effort at bringing the Iranian mullahs to heel without the use of military force? Can Iran hold out, or is the theocracy now economically strangled? To discuss these issues, we'll be joined today by Sage International Australia's Dr. Imad Harb. Dr. Harb is Director of Research and Analysis at the Arab Center, Washington, D.C. He is also Senior Non-Resident Fellow, Greater Middle East for Sage International Australia, as well as member of SIA Advisory Board. Dr. Harb often commentates on Middle Eastern issues for the US and international media. Before we start today's episode, I would like to remind listeners that Strategicon can be found on the Ozcast Network, iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, and on the Sage International Australia website, www.sageinternational.org.au. Welcome, Imad. Thank you for joining us.
Hi. Thanks for having me. How are you?
Doing very well.
Imad, could you please walk us through what started the Shiite Houthi uprising in Yemen? What were the aims of Hussein al-Houthi, the uprising's leader? And 15 years after this uprising started, are the Houthi rebels any closer to achieving their objectives?
The Houthis are a minority in Yemen. They have been at odds with the central government in Sana'a for a long, long time. After all, they consider themselves to have been robbed of a state. They used to be the people of the imamates of Yemen. That was basically destroyed. The monarchy was destroyed after 1962 when Yemen turned into a republic. And the Houthis are actually a tribe, a family within the Shiite community of Yemen. They actually consider themselves to be the representatives of that community. They live in the northwestern part of the country and have really had a very tough relationship with the central government. Back in 2004, at the beginning of this century, in 2004, they had really serious problems with the central government of former President, now late former President Ali Abdullah Saleh, who actually fought them hard, and really there were a lot of basically war crimes against them. In that war. Between 2004 and 2009, there were many different battles that, a battle would start, last for a few months, and then it would stop, and then another one will start again. So it was an on-again, off-again kind of military conflict. And finally, Ali Abdullah Saleh was able to subdue them simply because they were just too weak for his army. But after 2011, after the Arab Spring and its Yemeni version, the Houthis found new strength because the central government in Sana'a became weak, and Ali Abdullah Saleh was actually deposed, and his vice president Abd Mansour Hadi became the president. But there was a lot of instability, and there were demonstrations in the streets, and but the Houthis found themselves to have an upper hand, so to speak, because other political movements, other political parties were weakened, or and they did not necessarily provide the right answers for a post-Arab Spring Yemen. So the Houthis found themselves to have a very good opportunity to rise up again and demand what they believe to be their right for in self-rule, so to speak. And that developed between 2012 until 2014, when they basically got enough military strength to take over the country. They drove all the way down to Aden, the southern city of Aden. They practically took over the country, except for the eastern part towards the borders with Oman. But in the end, in March 2015, Saudi Arabia and the UAE led an Arab coalition to fight them and to stop them to basically fight them. They have not been stopped yet, and the coalition has so far failed to actually check them, so to speak. As we hear in the news, they're capable of even striking Saudi Arabia's oil platforms and filling stations. So they obviously are still a fighting force. The Saudi and Emirati coalition has not been able to really subdue them yet, and so in a way they're still standing, and how long they stand depends on how powerful Saudi Arabia and the UAE are. And as well, when we look at what's happening, it appears that they have not been able to really make a big dent against the Houthis.
Imad, what is the extent of Houthi-Iranian relations? Are the Iranians actively fomenting this struggle for their own ends?
It is definitely said that Iran is basically the patron of the Houthis, and there is a lot of credence here to it. The Houthis need outside assistance. They cannot be alone, and Iran would probably love to help them. But one thing is important to point out is that the Houthis are not the same denomination as Iran. Iran is the Twelver Shiites. The Houthis are not Twelver Shiites. As a matter of fact, the Houthis are closer to the Sunnis, actually, come to think of it, then they are to the 12 Shiites of Iran. But yet at the same time, since they are a minority within Yemen, and since Saudi Arabia sees them as a menace, obviously they'd go and get whatever assistance they can get from whomever, and Iran is there. On the other hand, there really has not been a whole lot of proof that Iran is actually sponsoring them, is actually giving them the weapons that they are using. First of all, they inherited a lot of the weapons of the Yemeni army because they took over the Yemeni state. And their ally was the former and late president Ali Abdullah Saleh, although he fought them for a long, long time. But after 2011, when he was deposed, he felt that he was basically pulled away from rule, and he wanted to basically avenge his loss of being president in Yemen. So he basically threw in his lot with the Houthis. And it was really very, very strange that he would do that. But the Houthis were willing to cooperate with whomever who would cooperate with them against the regime, against Saudi Arabia, against the new direction, the new orientation of Yemeni policy. And so they got a whole lot of arms from the Yemeni army. Yes, after 5 years of war, maybe a lot of these arms have been depleted, and maybe they are being assisted by Iran, but at the same time there is a huge Yemen is under siege. Yemen is under blockade by the Saudis and the Emiratis, unless if the Houthis are actually smuggling arms by sea, smuggling arms through a porous border with Oman. It's a different story, but it's really very, very hard to see how Iran can really get them a whole lot of weapons if they are under siege. At the same time, there is also a possibility that they are producing their own weapons, and there have been videotapes of activists, Hezbollah activists from Lebanon, who came to Yemen to assist the Houthis in their battle. And maybe the Hezbollah people are the ones who are teaching them how to make new arms. So it's really very, very, it's a very complicated issue. There is, the Trump administration has accused Iran of actually supplying weapons to the Houthis. But really, the accusations don't necessarily really stand, because there hasn't been a whole lot of evidence that Iranian arms are in the hands of the Houthis and they are using them against the coalition. The relationship and one final point, whether Iran supplies them with weapons or doesn't supply them with weapons. This is a very, very cheap kind of tool in Iran's hands against Saudi Arabia and the UAE, because they can exhaust Saudi Arabia and the UAE, and they can exhaust their economies, they can exhaust their militaries with a militia force that's really not necessarily a state, with a militia force, and at the same time, while Iran is not assisting them. So, it can provide it can give them some moral support, it can give them some political support, it can declare them to be, the true representatives of the Yemen, whatever it is. But this is all a propaganda thing, and most of it is propaganda. Obviously, they are receiving something from somewhere, from somebody, but not a whole lot.
David.
Imad, what are the historical parallels to the sort of Egyptians in Yemen, where it really became a graveyard for the Egyptian military? Is this a case where there is a wizened ancient population in Yemen who remember all the tricks of fighting a modern army, remember how to smuggle stuff in? Is there essentially a repetition of the past going on here that we just don't understand from being so far away?
Egypt tried to be in Yemen and stayed in Yemen for close to 8 years, and it proved to be really a disaster. It is said that up to 100,000 Egyptian soldiers remained in Yemen to help the new republic that was created in 1962 basically fight the monarchy, the remnants of the monarchy that was at the time assisted by Saudi Arabia. We should remember that there was what we call the Arab Cold War led by the two antagonists, Saudi Arabia and Jamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt. And they actually took it out on each other through proxy war in Yemen. And the Egyptian military was really weakened in the Yemen war. It is also said that the 1967 defeat by Egypt in the 1967 war with Israel was largely precipitated by the existence of all those Egyptian soldiers in Yemen away from the battle in Sinai. So Yemen was really a very, very bad military operation for the Egyptians. They suffered very heavy losses. They suffered very heavy material losses. And in the end, they just simply withdrew from Yemen and left it to its own devices. So now this is the very, very tough question to ask. I mean, what are the Saudis doing, knowing that Egypt got in there and lost that battle because of the fight against Egyptian soldiers, because of the very, very inhospitable terrain of Yemen to fight a traditional war with a large army. So now we do know now that most of the war that the Saudis are leading is an air war against the Houthis, and they're using their air force. But the Emiratis are coming up from the south, also using probably, I think, no more than one brigade, and the rest of them are Yemeni soldiers that are loyal to the legitimate president Abdrabbu Mansour Hadi. But still, nonetheless, the Houthis are basically the heirs of those people who fought the Egyptians before. They know the terrain, and they have a big cause. They have a cause to fight Saudi Arabia. So I repeat, it's very, very strange that the Saudis did not learn the Egyptian lesson, and now the parallel is very striking. Now Saudi Arabia is faced with the decision, do we withdraw defeated practically, just like the Egyptians did back in the 60s, or we continue to fight? The way things are going right now, the Saudis don't seem to be winning the war, not an air war anyway, unless if they really throw in a few tens of thousands of soldiers on the ground. But still, that is not necessarily a very good solution, because I personally don't believe that the Saudi army can really fight a ground war against the Houthis, and they are likely to really suffer big losses and probably not make any dent in on the battlefield.
Imad, there's a couple of books now about the British sort of activities in Yemen in the 60s, where it appears, a whole SAS squadron went off the books for a few years and taught, a large number of Yemenis advanced insurgency. How could the Saudis not understand that they're dealing people whose grandfathers were taught insurgency by the SAS, who just come back from fighting a counterinsurgency in Malaya? Like, this doesn't just seem a bit odd and dumb. It seems to be absolute hubris to ignore who the Houthis are, what they've been through, and what Yemen's been through.
Well, this is, you used my word. I was going to tell you, just outright hubris. The Saudis think that I think they just are convinced that all those weapons that they have been acquiring since the 1980s, 70s, 80s from the United States and elsewhere These are weapons that are going to win them whatever wars they like to fight. Come to think of it, and it's almost a psychological thing. Why wouldn't they not think that way? Because they've been spending so much money on weaponry. But yet, at the same time, it's from the conduct of the war since 2015, from the conduct of the war, it's so obvious that they are simply inept using the weapons that they have, and they have not been able to almost make a dent in Houthi resistance. All we hear about is they have really very fine weaponry, very fine airplanes, and but yet at the same time they don't seem to be hitting anything except big hospitals and big air bases and whatever it is. Something big they would hit it, but something that is really precisely targeted, they're not hitting almost anything. So from a military point of view, sometimes you wonder, not only in Yemen, but elsewhere, anywhere else. I mean, if there were, hypothetically, if there were to be some sort of a war or a military confrontation with Iran, how will they do?
See, this is the fantastic thing about it. Is what it shows, really the significance of this is it gives the Iranians a chance to just sit and watch how ineffectively, the training that's gone with the weapon systems has been. So for the Iranians, being involved here is the best way to prepare for a future war against the Saudis.
Precisely. I mean, I am sure that Iranian war planners are just watching every battle and how it's happening. And not only the air war, because all you have to do is just look at how the airplane is really. I mean, it's said that Saudi pilots are just too afraid to go down low to really do precise bombing raids. And if the Iranians know this, then they're going to be planning for high altitude bombing raids if that were the case. Even on the ground, whether they or the Yemeni army itself or the Emiratis in battles, in ground battles. I mean, it's really amazing how slow they have been. It's been 4 years since they, or at least the Emiratis, reconquered the city of Aden in the south. It's been 4 years since they did that to get up the Red Sea coast all the way to Hodeidah, and they didn't actually take over Hodeidah in 4 years. I mean, there was some sort of a peace plan according to which the Houthis agreed to withdraw from the city or something like that, and they still have not been able to actually really take over the port of Hodeidah. So. The Iranians are looking at this and say, well, come to think of it, I mean, if we have a war with the Saudis or the Emiratis, it's a walkover. It's almost shameful.
Well, Imad, can I just say something here? I mean, you and I have both worked on, these kind of strategic level issues for quite some time. But one thing that strikes me is that none of the Gulf state monarchies' armed forces are anything other than Praetorian guards. They're there essentially to defend the regime from internal threats, and arguably they're also there as elements of international prestige. Their warfighting capacities have always been limited because effectively the nature of the Western training that is being provided is not settling in. The various Gulf monarchies don't have the strategic culture to take up this training and embed it within their own force structures, which leads to the very thing that you say. And obviously with the Iranians, I mean, the Iranians have been in a state of perpetual war since the 1979 revolution in one phase or another. So and they've developed very much an autarkic military industrial complex, which of course the Arabs haven't done, which in many ways makes Iran really an existential threat against all of the Gulf Arab states.
Yeah, right. See, I think, but then again, I mean. I don't know how, you're right about the Praetorian nature of armed forces. Yes, you're right about that. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers all over the Arab world are they are just to protect the regime, so they're not really fighting forces. But yet, I mean, in 4 years' time, it's time for them. You would think for that 4 years, maybe good enough time to at least get some grip on how to use these weapons, or on how to win a war, or how to win a battle or something. I mean, we're talking about, and this is probably the nature of the battle itself. I mean, these are irregulars. The Houthis are irregulars who are hiding in mountains, and it's very difficult to get to them, or whatever it is. But at least even in the air war, I mean, succeed in your airplane. I mean, they're not downing your airplanes. They haven't. I don't think they have downed any Saudi airplanes so far. So why can't they do something about improving their targeting? Although the Americans have been busy for the last 4 years giving them the proper targeting and intelligence gathering. So it's to me, it's if they cannot win this war, they might as well just sue for peace and get it over with.
There's also another issue at stake here, and that is the fact that the Saudis and the Emiratis don't necessarily share exactly the same kind of war aims. They're fighting different groups on the ground, or at least their priority area of targeting is slightly different. I think that the Emiratis are chasing various Al-Qaeda-style militants and are also helping the Saudis out, but the Saudis are actually looking after the Houthis primarily. So with a sort of coalition of the willing that isn't seeing things in a holistic sense, I mean, this coalition is not going to develop kind of war aims that are going to see it victorious in the end, right?
Well, it's well, for one thing, I mean, you're right about Saudi and Emirati goals in Yemen. They're almost totally different from each other. Maybe they're even opposite to each other, because the Saudis are interested supposedly in restoring the legitimate authority to Sana'a and the person of the President Abdul Mansur Hadi. And the UAE is more interested about establishing itself some sort of a rump state or something like that in the south, where it can control Aden and can control the entrance to the Bab el-Mandeb waterway and the Red Sea, and from there to the Mediterranean Sea. So there is a lot of talk about the UAE specifically aiming towards specifically that, controlling South Yemen, controlling Djibouti, controlling Somaliland. I mean, they're the only country in the world that has recognized Somaliland as a state, and Somaliland is a breakup state from the Federation of Somalia. So they also are trying to get into Eritrea, and they have a base in Libya. So they do have a different objective than the Saudis, but yet at the same time, if there is any, if Yemen is to remain at least number one in Arab hands, under Arab control, whether it is through the Yemenis themselves or the Saudis or the Emiratis, at least they should assure that the Houthis are defeated. So, I mean, neither of them is basically putting enough effort or succeeding in doing specifically that. And if the Houthis are not broken, so to speak, if Yemen is not put under the control of some sort of an elite that is, friendly to Saudi Arabia and the UAE, you might as well just kiss the whole country goodbye.
Since the Saudis formed their military coalition to root out the Iranians from Yemen and break the back of the Houthi rebellion, what have the consequences of this action been?
The consequences have been, unfortunately, so far, there hasn't been a whole lot of accomplishment, so to speak, in the war effort, except that the coalition forces have been able to creep up the Red Sea coast, the Yemeni Red Sea coast in the west, and reach the outskirts of Hodeidah. In the interior, much of the inhabited country, of the inhabited Yemen, is still under Houthi control. So from the military standpoint, they have not necessarily done much. But on the other hand, from the humanitarian disaster side, they have done great damage. I mean, all international reporting is that the coalition forces are responsible for the majority of casualties, for the majority of the wounded, of or the displaced. They have basically, they put the country under siege, so there isn't enough medicine getting in, enough humanitarian assistance getting into the country. So from the point of view of humanitarian concerns, the coalition has caused tremendous damage. Just today I was reading, or yesterday I was reading something that the estimates are that at least 70,000 have died in Yemen, in the war of Yemen, and the majority of whom was caused by the coalition itself. There is another report by I forget which organization it is, that they're expecting if things continue to go this way, by 2020 the number of dead will be over 230,000. So, I mean, this is not a war that's being won. It's a war that's causing yet more humanitarian disasters. This is the country, like I said earlier, it's the poorest country in the Arab world. It is devoid of any life today. I mean, there is nothing to really talk about in Yemen except a devastating war that's killing people.
Imad, here in Australia, all we really get is English language press that shows us the humanitarian disaster but doesn't go deeply into trying to understand the underpinning issues. What is the Arab language press like? Is it more sophisticated? Does it ask these deep questions about what is the purpose of this war that is doing nothing more than causing a humanitarian disaster?
Yeah, no, great question. But unfortunately, the Arab press is not a free press, and I'm sure you know this. There is there's hardly any free press in the Arab world except in Beirut and Lebanon. And some of the Lebanese newspapers are also carrying water for some Arab countries, and even some of them are carrying water for the Iranian regime. So the Arab press is talking about the Yemen issue, as most of the Arab press, mind you, most of the Arab press, if not the overwhelming majority, is talking about the Yemen issue as an issue of Iranian interference in Arab affairs. In an Arab country, the Iranians have taken over Yemen through the Houthis, and the Houthis are just simply Arab stooges of Iranian hegemony. And not very many people talk about this very specific disaster strain, which is the humanitarian disaster. Not very many people are talking about that, specifically because the issue for the Arab press, that is not free press. The issue is political more than it is humanitarian.
So the problem ends up being that everyone is misrepresenting the war. So the Yemenis just get left to die and no one asks the deep questions. Because in the West, all we see is the disaster.
Unfortunately, that is specifically the case. There is nobody that's speaking for the ordinary Yemenis who are suffering from this war. The ironic thing is only the West is talking about the Yemen war as a devastating, disastrous war for the Yemeni people. Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, the Red Cross, people of that nature, organizations of that nature, the United Nations, UNESCO regarding Yemen's heritage. And so only the Western organizations are talking about the disaster that's happening in Yemen. Unfortunately, the Arab world is looking at Yemen as a political issue of Iranian interference, and thus it's not necessarily getting the proper attention.
You're listening to Strategicon, and this episode is your guide to ongoing conflict in Yemen between the Saudi Arabians and Iranians. But we'll take a small break to listen to some South Australian music, and we're pleased to feature a local duo, Heartway, with their hit single Beyond. You can catch up with Heartway on their Facebook page and listen to them on iTunes and Spotify. Beyond by Heartway, a wonderful local duo. You can find them on Facebook and listen to their other music on Spotify and iTunes. But for now, we'll return to our discussions on Middle Eastern conflict between Saudi Arabia and Iran in Yemen. As we've discussed, it's not clear resolution is in sight, but what about the intervening powers of the United States? John, David and Imad discuss.
On the 17th of April, President Trump vetoed the Yemen War Powers Resolution, a congressional maneuver calling for an end to US support for the Saudi-led coalition in Yemen. Trump said that the resolution is unnecessary in part because there are no United States military personnel in Yemen commanding, participating in, or accompanying military forces of the Saudi-led coalition against the Houthis in hostilities or affecting Yemen directly. So what can you say about Trump's veto, and will this veto be challenged by Congress?
Well, I have news for you. Today, you do know that he vetoed it, and 2/3 of both houses of Congress should override that veto. Today, the U.S. Senate gave the president what he wanted, and the U.S. Senate failed to override that veto by a vote of 53 to 45. And only a few Republicans sided with all the Democrats and independents in the Senate. Thus, the resolution, his veto is going to stand, and because they needed at least 67 senators to vote to override his veto, and the same 2/3 majority in the House. Now the House is not going to even look at it because the Senate failed to override the veto. So the president got his way, and the American support for the war effort will continue. Except that the Americans have withdrawn support on certain aspects that they used to do, like targeting and intelligence gathering and things like that, and refueling, aerial refueling, because the Saudis and the Emiratis said, okay, we'll refuel our own airplanes. But generally speaking, the president succeeded in sustaining his veto.
Yeah, I was going to suggest. I was going to say that the Saudis have started to pay back some $300 million worth of bills racked up for refueling support over the 3-year period, and this refueling support has been cancelled by the Trump administration late last year. Does this signal that Trump is in half a mind in terms of his support for the Saudis, or is this kind of like just something that was pushed up from inside the Pentagon instead? I mean, what's your sense?
I think that it's ambiguous. It's really ambiguous. The problem with the Trump administration is since January of 2017, when President Trump became president, the administration has had almost at least two voices. His voice from the White House and the voices of the different ministries, the different agencies of the executive branch. Surprisingly, the Department of Defense has been the most reluctant to be really very involved in the Yemen thing, in the Yemen issue. The Pentagon and Pentagon officials have always wanted to be only involved in fighting Al-Qaeda in Yemen. They did not really want to be fighting alongside the Saudis or the Emiratis. They didn't want to be involved in the Yemen, in the war against the Houthis. But the Obama administration before the Trump administration promised the Saudis that they're going to be helping them, because this was a payback. This was something that they wanted to give the Saudis, so the Saudis don't think that the United States is really siding with Iran. Because remember, we have to also put that in historical context. In 2015, July 2015, the Obama administration signed the nuclear deal with Iran, and the Saudis and Emiratis went up the wall. I mean, they were very, very, very distraught and very disappointed in that decision. So President Obama wanted to give them something. That's why he gave them intelligence sharing, targeting, assistance in targeting, and area refueling, and things of that nature, training, and things like that. But the primary concern of Obama at the time and the Defense Department since then has always been Al-Qaeda in Yemen, because it is the most lethal kind of organization as far as Al-Qaeda is concerned. Obviously, the Islamic State became the more lethal, but the Pentagon has always been concerned about Al-Qaeda in Yemen, and they wanted to continue that fight, and they are continuing it anyway.
US Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden has called for an end to US assistance to Saudi Arabia's war in Yemen. However, if the US did withdraw their support for the Saudi coalition in Yemen, could this lead to the Houthis' seizure of Bab el-Mandeb Strait, thereby allowing the rebels to interfere with oil shipments from the Gulf through to the Suez Canal?
American assistance to the Saudis in Yemen, the Saudis and the Emiratis in Yemen, was not responsible for the Houthis not taking over the country. Honestly, I mean, the Houthis took over the country in 2014, 2015, but then the Saudis and the Emiratis went in and assisted the Yemeni government, and actually the UAE also fielded some fighting forces that kicked the Houthis out of Aden and on to the north. But I don't think that cutting off the Saudis totally is going to mean that the Houthis are going to go back to Aden and take over Bab el-Mandeb waterway. It's a very far-fetched thing. On the other hand, if the Yemeni army that's fighting them now, and if the Emiratis totally withdraw or the Saudis stop that war. If the Houthis decide to take it over, who knows? Maybe they can. But I really don't think that the American decision to help or not help is really decisive in that matter. I mean, short of this, the United States fielding fighting forces there, I don't think that their assistance in the war effort now is really makes a big difference in that specific aspect.
Because it's such, from the West, all we're seeing is a massive humanitarian disaster. If the United States wanted to be more involved, could you conceive of them using uniform boots on the ground, or do you think it would be more likely that it would be private military contractors? And if the idea of using private military contractors to essentially win the war on the Saudi and Emirati behalf, would this be acceptable to the Saudis and Emiratis to be shown up by ex-American troops, now contractors, with more than a decade's experience in Iraq and Afghanistan of fighting this kind of war?
I don't think that the Saudis would be very happy if it was known that mercenaries are private, whatever they're called, private contractors, are fight the war in Yemen. At the same time, if it were to be done secretly, maybe they'll accept it. But at the same time, the private contractors are already there. I mean, the UAE is using them for. The New York Times wrote about this, and there were other reports about the private military contractors, mainly Americans, who were interrogating people who objected to the UAE presence in South Yemen. First of all, I don't think the United States is at all in discussions or is willing to put boots on the ground. It's not going to be doing that. The president has discounted that. When he ran for office, he said he wants to bring American troops home. I don't think that he is really in the process of dispatching troops to Yemen to fight against the Houthis. On the other hand, it would be really, it's possible. I mean, Eric Prince would probably love to get a few $1 billion for this and field some private military contractors there. But it's going to take thousands of them to be able to make a dent in the resistance of the Houthis. I don't think the Houthis are a pushover. They have proven it for over the last few years. Yes, the private military contractors may be rather well adept at winning wars or whatever, but I don't think that they are. They can easily really overcome the resistance from the Houthis. It would be extremely, extremely embarrassing for the Saudi Arabians and the UAE and the Emiratis if this were to transpire, because it would be really an insult to their military institutions that after years of trying to do something with the Houthis, then they opt to get private military contractors to do the war for them. I really don't think that this is really in the cards.
So as you said earlier, the Saudis and Emiratis desperately need to find a way out of this as soon as possible in some sort of negotiated peace.
This is why. I mean, it's very, very difficult to try to imagine what the Saudis or the Emiratis would like to do now. But this is a stalemate. I mean, this is over 4 years. 26 March 2015, they began the air operations, and now we're 4 years and almost 2 months. So they haven't done anything. What I think is they are trying to make the mission, the United Nations supported mission of Martin Griffiths, as successful as possible in their own favor. If they were winning anything militarily, that Mr. Griffiths would have finished with his mission. The Houthis are not defeated. This is why Mr. Griffiths is not succeeding with his mission. If the Houthis get defeated militarily, Mr. Griffiths would be able to do the deal. The Houthis would just simply go back to their homeland, or to go back to the northeast, to the northwest, and the legitimate government of Mansour Hadi would return to Sana'a. But apparently, the military angle of this is not working out. And if it doesn't work out, that means it's going to be a problem. Now, will the Saudi Arabians sue for peace, even if they are losing the war? This is something I really can't answer. I don't know, but they're paying. Estimates differ. They're paying anywhere between $6 and $9 billion a month on this war. They are selling bonds and all that stuff to make up for budget deficits. The UAE economy is not doing very well, and the UAE leaders are telling their people that the war in Yemen is really hampering our development efforts, and economic things in the UAE are not going very well. So I really don't know how long they can go, but they better try to find some sort of a political solution, accept some things. I think a situation where the Houthis can be given some sort of a self-rule or something like that in their areas. I really don't know exactly what Mr. Griffiths has succeeded in convincing the Houthis to accept, but only a political solution will help end this really, really disastrous war.
Imad, if we move from Yemen to the US oil sanctions in Iran, ever since the 1979 Iranian Revolution, the US and Iran have been at loggerheads, often seeing each other as the enemy. But now, after years of Cold War-style confrontation with Iran, the US has finally imposed its most stringent sanctions of all on a part of the Iranian economy that affects both the government and the people. How have the Iranian leadership taken to this US move?
Well, the Iranian leadership has rejected whatever sanctions that the United States has imposed on Iran. I think that they are willing to fight until the death, like they say, to fight the great Satan. They will always say that because that is what sustains the regime. I mean, if the regime says that they're going to accept whatever the United States says, that means that the regime collapses because it loses its raison d'être, its reason for being. On the other hand, how much can the Iranian economy take? This is a big question. Only a year ago, Iran was exporting 2.5 million barrels a day. Today is probably down to about 800,000 barrels. So it's the squeeze is on. The problem is if the squeeze is on, does that mean that the Iranian regime really cries uncle? It's doubtful that the Iranian regime will cry uncle. I think all this is doing is strengthening the hardliners and making the moderates look stupid, because they trusted that reaching a nuclear deal would really open up things for the Islamic Republic, but apparently these things are not happening, not with Trump and not with the way things are going now.
How much support are the Iranians getting from the Chinese and Russians? Because the Iranians are such a wonderful irritant for the Americans that it would seem to me that it's in China and Russia's interest to quietly find as many ways to support the regime as possible.
That's true. That's true. The Chinese import today import probably about half of what Iran is able to sell of oil, probably about 400, 500,000 barrels a day. And when the President Trump ended the exemptions on importing Iranian oil, the Chinese and the Turks and for one thing, Russia rejects anything that has to do with sanctions on Iran anyway. But the Chinese were not very happy, and the Chinese are looking out for themselves. And at the same time, they're also using this to find a way of entering the Middle East forcefully through the Iranian gate. So it's a tough thing, but the Chinese are going to stick to their guns. And if the American administration, the Trump administration, continues to pressure the international community the way it is pressuring the international community, maybe China will finally just break out the bottles, break out that new currency that it wants to use to replace the American dollar, at least in its part of the world, and where it has influence, whether it's Iran or South Asia or East Asia. So it's going to be very, very hard for the United States to try to, number one, convince the Chinese to break away from Iran, and number two, if China does not break away from Iran, to basically punish. How do you punish China? You have a trade balance, not what do you call it? Trade exchange of probably like $250 billion a year. How do you punish a country like that has so much of your trade, that imports from you, that exports to you? It's really very, very, very tough. I don't think that the Trump administration really thinks about what it does. And this is why its foreign policy is basically a shambles.
So once again, like North Korea, we end up with a situation where the Americans want things they just can't have because they're not willing to sit down at a table with either the Russians or the Chinese to get a full global perspective.
Well, that's a way of looking at it, but yet at the same time, to me, it's much more primitive than that. I don't think that the American administration is capable of understanding what foreign policy is and how foreign policy should be conducted. I mean, sitting down and talking to the Chinese or the Russians means that they know the issues. I honestly, for the life of me, I do not understand. I think that President Trump or the Vice President Pence or Secretary of State Mike Pompeo really understand the issues they're talking about. They do not understand. They don't know foreign policy. And this is what happens what happened to American foreign policy since 2017. American foreign policy is being led by people who don't know the world, don't know diplomacy, and don't know how to make things work for the United States. This is why the United States foreign policy is a shambles. And this is why the United States is losing every single thing that it tries overseas. It's all a show for nothing.
Imad, do you think that there'll be a series of escalatory moves leading to Iran pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal? And if that happens, will this destroy any goodwill the Iranians may have had with the Europeans?
The Europeans have a big problem. I mean, their relations with the United States are so important to them that they cannot really shun the United States. They can't tell the Trump administration that we're not going to go along with you. They went ahead and, at any rate, they went ahead and they found some alternative plan of still trying to buying Iranian oil without having to go through the American. I really don't understand that mechanism, that European mechanism that was created a couple of months ago. But how long can the world go with the United States, the one that decides how the international economy really goes? Its currency, the American dollar, is the currency that the international community uses. How can the international community go along with a foreign policy that's ill-advised, that is not well studied, well evaluated, well looked into, and is being conducted by people who don't understand it? How can the international community go along with such a foreign policy if the foreign policy is not really producing what it's supposed to produce, and only is making the world more unstable and more tense? Maybe Iran may find itself in a situation, if it's pushed hard enough, and really if the moderates are finally totally sidelined in Iran, and the hardliners come in. Maybe the hardliners will say, we signed this deal and it didn't work out, so we're going to pull out from it. Maybe that's what the Trump administration is aiming to do, that Iran leaves the JCPOA and then is convinced to conduct negotiations on a different deal. But the Iranians are not going to go. The Obama administration went through hoops to get what it got in the JCPOA. The Iranians are not going to give anything else anymore, and they probably will be even more hardline on what to give, if to give anything in the future. So if the Trump administration is counting on Iran withdrawing from the JCPOA, and if Iran does withdraw from the JCPOA, we're looking at an international community that is preparing itself for a war with Iran. And that is not something that anybody should be talking about.
So Iran's capacity to withstand the oil sanctions or not will basically dictate whether or not the country will slide into war, similar to how potential sanctions from the United States forced Japan into a similar situation, using oil as a weapon and starving that country of that critical resource. Now, if Iran can't get its oil to market, and basically the Ayatollahs don't have any money to buy off the Iranian people, which looks like that may be the case, that obviously sets up the notion of further rebellions by the Iranian people against the regime, and we have seen that back in 2009. So, their back is really up against the wall. How do you see that an Iranian war may take place, and if not a war, then what will the Middle East balance of power look like if there is a regime collapse in Tehran?
I don't see any hopeful signs from any of this, because first of all, it would be stupid for Iran to try to stir the pot, so to speak, in the way of a war or a confrontation, or for any reason whatsoever. We're talking about a coalition of forces, so whether it is in the Gulf states or whether it is Israel, whether it's the United States. We're talking about a coalition of forces that has no qualms whatsoever about leveling every building in Iran to the ground if Iran is going to go to war. I think the only solution, the only possibility that Iran might do is just simply sell its oil surreptitiously under the radar without anybody knowing. I think that the Iranians are great at selling oil or selling anything else. They have experienced sanctions since the 1970s, 1980s. They are adept at smuggling. They're adept at using cash in their transactions. That will probably be the only thing that they can do short of economic collapse. We're talking about a inflation of 40%. We're talking about budget deficits. We're talking about both elites and the people really getting hitten very, very hard by sanctions. But yet, at the same time, the alternative is devastation. The alternative is the devastation of it's a Samson's option. Iran gets destroyed, but at the same time, it destroys all the countries around it because it's not going to go down easily. So this is precisely why the Trump administration is doing the wrong thing. If the Trump administration does not want the area, the Gulf region, to go up in flames, it should not do what it is doing. You cannot corner a bull and expect him not to harm you. The Iranians are going to harm everybody if they are themselves harmed, and if the regime feels that it is going to collapse. For one thing, if Iran collapses, that means civil war in Iran and the partition of Iran anyway. So that's why the regime is going to try its darndest to remain in power and to remain as steadfast as it can. But it needs help. It needs the help of the international community. It needs the help of the Trump administration to say we should not squeeze them so hard as to explode. If they explode, everybody else explodes with them.
National Security Advisor John Bolton may have something to say about that. He's always been an enemy of the Iranians.
Good old John is at it, and he's really very happy to do that. But that's not right.
Let's hope the rest of the world doesn't listen to him.
Fingers crossed. Anyway, that brings this episode to an end. That's a wrap. Thanks very much for joining us on this episode of Strategic on Imad.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Imad.
Thanks for listening, everyone. We hope that you'll join us for our next exciting adventure through the world of geopolitics. Remember that you can subscribe to Strategicon through the Ozcast network, iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, Breaker, as well as like us on the Sage International Australia Facebook site and follow us on Twitter. We appreciate any and all of your support. Also, please comment on any of our articles and podcasts through Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and of course on the Sage International Australia site. We welcome any constructive feedback that can help improve our podcasts, and we look forward to engaging with our followers. Until next time, it's goodbye from me, Tim Whiffen, and thank you to John Bruni and David Olney for joining us today.